Hi and welcome. Thank you all so much for being here. It's really a pleasure to be live and in person in Los Angeles with so many great friends and clients of the firm. We also have many more of you participating remotely, and so we're grateful that you've chosen to spend your morning with us. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Desiree Moore. I am a partner in the Chicago office of Venable. I have a crisis management practice, so I handle all manner of crises for clients across industries, including digital crises, but with an emphasis, particularly in recent years, on clients in the sports and entertainment adjacent industries. We have styled our program today as a sports and entertainment program, and welcome so many of you who are in both sports and entertainment to be here. I want to make a quick note about the way that we've styled the program. As the three of us were preparing our discussion today, we wanted to not only tailor it to all of you who are in those industries, but also we recognize that so many of our clients now, irrespective of industry, touch on sports and entertainment in some way, whether as vendors, as partners, as insurance carriers, as participants, as corporations who may have relationships with influencers. So it is pervasive across industries. So we welcome everybody, and this program really is tailored for everyone. Before we get into the program, I wanted to share a little bit about Venable's sports practice group. I'm the co-chair of our sports law practice group, and we do work across sports, across clubs and teams, leagues, national governing bodies, college athletics, and handle all manner of legal issues that come up for our sports clients. We have a really deep bench, excellent practitioners, and so many of you here in the room and remotely have worked with our team. And so we're pleased to do an event for you and to have the opportunity to work with you day in and day out. A couple of administrative items. If you're looking for CLE credit, we have the materials on the desk, and you can sign in remotely, I think, up front. Chris is going to do code of some kind.
Code word about halfway through. Yep.
So pay attention for that code word if you're on remotely. And if you have any questions about CLE logistics, just let us know. But we want to make sure that for those of you who are looking for CLE, you'll get your CLE credit. With that, I think we've handled the administrative items. I'm grateful to be here with my colleagues Jennifer and Chris, and I'll turn it over to Jennifer so she can introduce herself and her fantastic background.
Great, thank you. I am also really thrilled to be here. I joined Venable in May. I came here after 4 years in the government. I spent 2 years at the Department of Homeland Security in a legal role, including as the acting general counsel, and 2 years at the White House at the National Security Council, first in a legal role as the principal deputy National Security Council legal advisor, and then in a more policy role as a deputy Homeland Security advisor. And what I did over those past 4 years was really every kind of crisis management and crisis prevention possible with respect to protecting Americans at home and abroad. So worked across counter-narcotics, counterterrorism, border security, protection of events that were designated as special events, given ratings in which they were subject to special designations, worked a lot on drone issues and counter-drone issues, and very excited to bring some of those skills and that background to the private sector. I chose Venable in large part because there really is just such an extraordinary team here that works across legal policy and tech in these areas. I am also part of a cybersecurity group, and we have an incredible team of policy and tech folks in that particular area as well. And just the opportunity to collaborate again across legal policy and tech, to collaborate across different issue areas at a firm that is so interdisciplinary and collaborative, and really can help our clients do the things that are critical for effective crisis prevention and crisis management, which really is looking ahead, trying to identify the threats that are coming, put in place all of the gap assessments and the protections that are possible, and then be ready for when there is in fact an event, which unfortunately does happen, and have the systems and the teams in place to be as effective as possible. And we'll spend a lot of time today talking about how we do that in the best way possible. And with that, I'll turn it over to our amazing moderator, Chris.
I don't know about amazing, but thank you all here for braving LA traffic to come in, and everybody who's listening. We really appreciate you taking your time. One little bit of housekeeping. I don't know if we'll get to questions. We'll see how we do on time. But if you're remote, you can put a question in the chat, and our experts will try to answer them afterwards if we don't get to them here during the time. I'm a partner in our corporate and transactional group. I work in entertainment and in sports, but for these purposes, my goal is to draw out the best of our great panelists who are actually the experts on this. So why don't we dive right into it? I'll give you a hypothetical and you spot the issues. It's like we're back in law school now. So there's a major outdoor sports event in Los Angeles, which isn't hard to imagine since we're going to host the Super Bowl, the Olympics, and the World Cup here, in addition to all the other things that we do. So we're talking about a large crowd, outdoors, national television audience. In the days and weeks leading up to the event, there were some disturbing statements made on social media about a potential attack with political overtones in some cases, but the team and the league discussed it, talked to local, federal, and state authorities, and it was decided to continue with the game. It's the day of the game, and there has, in fact, been an incident. It appears to be a mass casualty event involving an explosion during the game. Before police and security are even able to secure the premises, there are videos being posted on social media. We're not going to see one Zapruder film in the future and the present. We're going to see 16,000 Zapruder films. Before, some of the videos appear to have been even created by AI. So it's hard to tell what's real and what isn't. So you're the general counsel to the club. We're an executive responsible for the club. What should people be doing in the first hour, first day, first week, next 6 months? Obviously, the first concern of everybody involved is the casualties and the safety of people who are actually at the event. After that priority, tell us about concerns ranging from coordinating with law enforcement, maybe even intelligence agencies, the board of directors and what their role should be, communicating internally and externally, the club's employees, including players, the league, and then insurance and downstream liability issues, and anything else you want to tell us about.
So thanks, Chris. And actually, I want to take this out of order a little bit and just point out something that I think will then help us kind of further the discussion, which is that you are behind from the beginning because you have no control over the internal and external communications and the way that this event is being perceived. And that will have a significant bearing on the legal implications, on the safety implications, on the way that law enforcement triages alongside the club. And so we are running from the outset, and maybe this is a good time to say, and we'll say it throughout, this is a very good, this hypothetical is extreme. We're going to talk about so many things, but even with a micro crisis, being prepared before something like this happens is the number one takeaway of this program. And we'll talk about how to get prepared, but you are much better off if you have thought about a scenario like this or some version of a scenario where you are triaging everything from injury, containment, digital crises, social media impact. If you've thought about it up front, because if you're doing it in real time, you can do it, and we would do it alongside you, but it is so much harder you're just behind the entire time. And so I think that's an important thing to make a fine point on here, is that you are running with your hair on fire for something like this unless you have prepared yourself. So
we'll talk about, I think, in the second half, what do you do now to prepare for things in the future? But for purposes of this scenario, it's just happened.
Yep.
So what's the first thing that you think of as an executive or a lawyer in a situation like that? What's the very first thing, obviously after taking care of people who are hurt or injured and safety?
Yeah. So I'll jump in, and then Jen, want to hear your thoughts. We want the Bureau involved right away and local law enforcement, and we want to be liaising with them immediately to discuss the impact of this incident. However, you want to be very careful what you say to anyone, because none of those conversations are going to be privileged, and there will be implications, litigation implications, regulatory implications, among many others, as you're dialoguing. So as the GC or an executive at the corporation, I want to be very guarded in what I say as I'm liaising with law enforcement to contain the incident. That's my first thought.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, of course, and think if you're the executive and the executive's having those conversations, it's very important that the executive bring a GC or outside counsel or some counsel with them for those conversations. But that should not deter those conversations because those conversations are absolutely essential. One of the things, we'll talk about liability issues in a moment, but the issue for liability is does the entity engage in a reasonable duty of care? And a reasonable duty of care will require engagement with federal, state, and local law enforcement very quickly to save lives, to minimize damage to property. And so doing that is very important, but doing so in a way that's smart and thoughtful is also key. The other thing that I'd say at the outset is that there will be, in a crisis like this, there is immediately, there's going to be press calling, there's going to be families of people who are potentially injured calling. There's going to be employees calling. There's going to be the mayor calling. There's also like the outreach to the federal, state, and local law enforcement is not going to have to wait for the team to reach out. Those law enforcement agencies and others will be calling as well. And so, in particular for any messaging that is either even internally and certainly externally, it is incredibly important to express concern, to express the urgency with which the team or the entity is taking the event, but to be non-specific about any of the facts. Like one thing that we know from crises is that whatever you think happened in those first moments always evolves, and it evolves over days, it evolves over weeks, sometimes even it evolves more. And so being very guarded and very careful not to suggest something that ends up being false, because that then becomes another basis by which other entities can either critique the entity, can critique you, and or potentially if you get in a situation where there's oversight or litigation, it can be a problem in that situation as well.
Des, who's your first call? Let's say you're the club and the club doesn't own the venue, right? So there's at least two organizations involved here right off the bat, and you're the GC or you're the president of the club. Who's your very first call?
I think in this case, it's the chair of the board. I want the chair of the board.
It wouldn't be the security at the facility?
Well, they're calling us, right? They're coming to us, right? So who am I proactively reaching out to is the chair of the board, so that the key stakeholders are roped in. They know that we're working with law enforcement. They know that we're containing the incident. They know that insurance is already being tapped, right? We're looking at our policies. We're assessing what many policies in this level of crisis might come into play. And then I'm roping in the chair of the board, because otherwise he or she is knocking down my door to say, what is the plan here? What happened? How are we going to salvage this? What do we do about our business partners? And so I want to, as an executive, as a key executive, as the GC working with the key executives, we want to make sure that internally we are aligned. Now, when we say a first call, in these major crisis scenarios, this is all happening in parallel. This is all happening in parallel. And as the GC, one of the things that you can do to be helpful is tap the right executives to handle certain aspects of triaging. Right? There will be somebody who can liaise with the carriers. There will be somebody else, CEO typically, who will liaise with the chair of the board and say, we've got this. This is our plan. This is what we knew. And again, very carefully, because there isn't all that much that you can say at the outset that would be accurate. But you have to rope in your stakeholders. Otherwise, you're fighting internally and you're triaging externally. So to me, that eliminates some of the noise. And again, there will be many people knocking down your door at the same time, and you have to be responsive to those people.
And just in terms of figuring out what's going on, how useful is the media and stuff that's coming through social media to just figure it out? Because in our scenario, there's been an explosion. That's really all we know.
So I think, the authoritative source of information is going to be federal, state, and local law enforcement. They're the ones who are going to be able to tell you and investigate and figure out what actually happened. Social media, there will probably be videos on social media. It can be interesting to look at those videos to try to get a sense of what's happening. That will be in more real time, much more quick than you're going to get information and answers out of law enforcement. But again, you can't rely on that. Like the video, you can't rely on the videos. You don't know that the videos are accurate. You don't know
Especially with AI.
Especially with AI. And so it is important, I think, for the GC and for the CEO and for the board to understand what people are saying about an event. So it's very useful for that. But you cannot assume that is accurate, and until there's some sort of authoritative assessment and review, that is critical. The other thing that you don't know in this moment is this a wave? Like, is this attack? Is there going to be follow-on attacks? And so in addition to all the communication, I mean, I know you mentioned already safe and security, but that also has to stay like foremost in everybody's brain. Like, what are we doing everything possible to keep our people and the civilians in the area and other people around safe and secure? Are we thinking about a follow-on attack? Is there any risk of it? What are we doing to safeguard ourselves? And on cybersecurity side as well, like if it's a particularly sophisticated and coordinated attack, there could be a physical attack. It's then followed by some sort of cyber attack. Have you looped into the security teams to make sure that you're looking for threat actors that are trying to enter the network, that you've put in place the right protections in the cybersecurity system as well? So it's really all hands on deck, both in terms of responding, but also anticipating what might be coming next as well.
And I'll, I'll build on the social media piece a little bit. I think there are certain crises that call for triaging with Meta and X and others to try to reduce the dialogue and the information and misinformation that's being disseminated. In a scenario like this, realistically, there will be no way to curtail what people are saying, how quickly it's spreading. The platforms are not responsive enough that you could really narrow the universe of what is being disseminated publicly. And so that is probably not the best use of our time. Again, we have many scenarios with clients where, there might be, misinformation or a executive is being, compromised in some way digitally. Yes, we can address that. That's a narrow kind of digital issue here. Again, I wouldn't focus, because you're not going to there are so many other things that you need to be doing. You just have to let the kind of misinformation play out. And the best that you can do, and Jen touched on this, is have a holding statement prepared that you issue that demonstrates that you're being proactive, that you are engaged, that you're concerned, and particularly if it can be the CEO or somebody prominent in the organization, so that it's clear that it's meaningful. I think in this hypothetical, there would be no question that it's meaningful to the organization, but somebody who is, prominent to say, we care, we're here, we're doing everything we can to protect, to remediate, and to continue.
I want to ask on that line of thought, when the right time is where you would go public officially and who would be involved in that. But a related question is, in our hypothetical, Jen, there was chatter about this. I think that's the technical term that you folks use in the government. You've been at the highest levels of national security. You've been briefing the president. This is a big event. We're talking about something that's nationally televised. So it's one of the big events that's going on in the country at that time. There's been some talk about it. If the club's coordinating with national officials and local officials and state officials, are they going to be there? Are they going to be focused on this? And how is the club going to work with them in the immediate aftermath of this? How does that look both before and during the events?
Yeah, so there is constantly chatter about various bad things happening. I mean, it's just there's like a low level of chatter that's constantly happening, not to scare people, but it is true. It is constantly happening. It's happening right now. So the question is, if the club had gotten a warning, presumably that low level of chatter had reached some sort of higher pitch that triggered some duty, some desire, some decision by either Homeland Security officials or FBI, DOJ to provide some sort of warning either to local officials, and then the local officials may have provided a warning to the club. So there's clearly been some sort of heightened something that has triggered a desire to make a heightened warning, to issue a heightened warning, which we'll get to in a moment, because that gets into like, once that happens, what's the responsibility and the duty of club owners, venue operators, and others in terms of trying to harden security and take more proactive steps in advance. Once an event like this happens, you're absolutely right. Like, the president's going to want to be briefed constantly. As I said, like there's going to be an incredible amount of interest from the federal government as well as state and local. You would presume in an event like this that the FBI would be involved, that they would be actively engaged, that DHS would be actively engaged, that possibly other agencies would be actively engaged.
Would they be on site?
Yes. And I mean, there are, as everybody knows, there's local FBI and DHS field offices all around the country. There's there's Joint Terrorism Task Forces all around the country. So there's people that are predisposed to be able to move really quickly in these types of events, and they would be there quickly depending on where the event is, within, minutes, hours, but not days.
Is that standard operating procedure for truly high level events now? Regardless of whether there's any threats or chatter?
The response is whether or not there's events or chatter is irrelevant to the response. The response is there's been an attack, there's been mass casualties. People are going to get there and get on the scene immediately, regardless of the reason, the cause, the instigator behind it.
Is in that sense, is it is a truly high profile event a harder target for somebody who's planning an attack as opposed to game 148 of a team's MLB season? If they wanted to contemplate that?
Yeah, the response. So a couple of thoughts about that. So a truly high profile event. So many of you probably know that when there's certain events get rated, there's national special security events. Those are things like the State of the Union. The Super Bowl periodically has been designated as it's called an SSE, given that designation. But there's also other special event ratings as well that go through 1 through 4. And so groups that are having these kinds of events can seek these ratings, and then depending on the rating, there'll be certain proactive things set up in advance. It may involve some, again, depending on the event, certainly for the Super Bowl and the Rose Bowl, there'll be counter UAS technologies that would be set up for mitigation. There'd be pre-positioning, there'd be a lot of planning. But so that affects what goes into planning prior to an event. And again, if an event has this kind of rating, they will get additional federal assistance to support proactively before the event happens. If there is a mass casualty event, regardless of whether it's a high profile event or not a high profile event, there will be a surge of federal resources that will come in to try to support state and locals, regardless of what degree of proactive planning had happened in advance of the event.
Chris, can I build on that for a moment just to say, I think
Please do.
I think that and that's super helpful to think about, because it clarifies the role of the GC and the CEO, which is to liaise, to support, to provide information, to understand what the Bureau and local law enforcement is learning as they learn it. But you also have a business to protect. You have business operations that need to continue to move forward. Again, you have a board that you answer to. You have customers, clients, stakeholders, athletes who are going to rely on you to understand what's next for the life of the business, vendors that you may owe money to, that you have liability to because of contractual relationships. And so I think quickly you would see the company pivot to addressing their business and operational liability and exposure while law enforcement activates and really handles the physical crisis.
Circling back to the question that I had before we went into that, how, when, and who is the club or the organization of people now who are involved in this going to go public, other than obviously expressing sympathy for the people who are harmed and the awfulness of the situation? What are they going to say?
I think you can say very little, but typically, and when we have the benefit of preparing in advance, the kind of outline that we use is acknowledge the incident, the crisis, the matter, indicate that you're being proactive, that you have concern, that there are teams external to the organization and internal to the organization who are working diligently to address it, and then end with a mission statement. What is the mission statement of the organization? Bring it back to that. And that I think is the best framework for ensuring that your stakeholders know that you are proactive and engaged, but you really have to be very careful. And again, as you know, a litigator, ultimately in my practice, I'm always thinking about the long-term impact of a misstatement, particularly because you're going to have not only litigation across the board here, a lot of regulatory scrutiny. And so, you know, when you're sitting before Congress, you want to make sure that whatever you've said 6 months ago doesn't put you in the hot seat.
I completely agree with that. And I think that over time, and there will be probably demands for new statements over time, but they really need to be basically variations on that theme using slightly different words, because it is not in the entity of the club's interest to get into the details of what happened, even after there's been a more thorough assessment. It's just not, that's not the role. That's the role of law enforcement. That's not the role of the club. And it's not in their interest to get into that. But expressing empathy, if there's been deaths, there's been serious injuries, having the CEO make a call to families to like show empathy, like all those things go a really long way. And there's ways to do that without getting into any of the details as to what actually happened.
What about who's speaking from our organization and who's not speaking from our organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important, and this again goes to the importance of planning in advance. It is very important for the organization to speak with one voice. It's absolutely essential. And so among the many things that need to happen before you get into the situation is putting in place a very good crisis management plan, ideally exercising that plan, knowing exactly who the roles and responsibilities are that Desiree talked about at the beginning, so that when there's a crisis, you know who's doing what. And there's clarity across the organization that there is one person who speaks. It should be a statement from the organization or from the CEO, but there should not be multiple people speaking.
What about our loudmouth owner on X?
I mean, obviously you can't control, and there's only so much you can do as a council. I think you can certainly advise, but that's all you can do.
Yeah, and it's an important point, because we do see organizations get in trouble where their executives or even lower level employees are speaking out of turn when there's a crisis. And again, once a statement is put out, it's really hard to pull it back. The general counsel should and can advise early and often that nobody should be speaking. So to your question, who speaks in a crisis of this magnitude? It's the CEO, it's somebody very prominent. However, the more important thing is who doesn't speak. And I think there has to be a very clear directive across the organization that no one is authorized to speak unless otherwise told. And that includes not, even if a reporter calls you, you simply say, I don't have any authority to speak about this. Nobody says no comment. That's a really important nuance. As soon as you have people across the organization saying no comment, that's construed as a comment. So, providing clarity, ideally in advance, but if not in advance, almost immediately, that nobody should speak on the topic, it's going to be very important.
And it highlights the importance of, coordinating with the owner as well. So obviously you can't, nobody can control what an owner says, but making clear the importance of that and the kind of messaging that's going out can help at least minimize the risk that the owner or somebody else issues a statement that's out of sync with what the agreed upon message is.
I'd also point out we have athletes and coaches on the field who may be victims of this, may in some sense be targets of this, who are public figures. And when are you speaking with them and bringing them together, and how's that happening? Because they're clearly going to be the most traumatized people in the organization and are public figures.
Yeah, that's very difficult. So that raises sort of HR implications, which I think are very important in a scenario like this. One, in a major crisis, you have to be taking care of your people. And so offering psychological support services almost immediately, and then giving some leeway. I think in a scenario like that, there will be leeway for an athlete, particularly a high profile athlete, to make a statement, on a public facing forum. I think some of that stuff you have to let go. You have to relinquish a little bit of control. What you will sometimes run into in those scenarios is that somebody might make a politically charged statement, right? So in this instance, maybe there's some attribution to a particular activist group or particular, sort of designated group that might engage in this behavior. And maybe you have an athlete say something untoward or unfavorable, and that can create sort of another stream of liability. So it's something that you almost have to be responsive to rather than proactive about, where the victims are also people who might be construed as spokespeople for the organization.
Yeah, we're talking about a lot of legal issues, but at the end of the day, this is a human tragedy that is unfolding in real time. And you can't lose sight of that.
That's right. I mean, you have to be a little bit practical, and you have to
course.
just understand that now with this, horrific crisis, you're also assuming a lot of risk that you didn't anticipate, and it's going to be imperfect.
Well, let me throw a new fact into the scenario if I can. Jen, I'll aim this one at you in the first instance. So drones have just taken over the headlines in Ukraine. We're all learning about drones now, and it's not kids flying them around for fun. A weaponized drone, the Ukrainians and the Russians are now experts at this, and I read about the Iranian drone that, looks like it could deliver a missile somewhere. Let's say in our scenario, there's some reports of that. Let's say that's a possibility. That's a truly frightening thing, right? Somebody could, in a remote way, not even entering the facility, deliver an explosive device. How do we think about that? How do we process that in preparation?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and normalizing, like integrating counter drone planning as part of security planning has got to be what every event owner, planner, sports club is doing right now. It is incredibly easy. It is incredibly cheap to attach payloads to drones and to weaponize drones. We are, I think, unfortunately, not sufficiently prepared as a nation to respond to that threat. There are very limited authorities to engage in mitigation measures to take down a drone that is weaponized. I mean, it can be done in self-defense in an extreme situation, but there's very little authority to do so in a proactive way. There are only 4 agencies in the U.S. government that have this authority. It's very limited. The Department of Defense has some authority over its own facilities, certain designated facilities. The Department of Energy has limited authority over certain nuclear sites and where there's nuclear power. DHS and DOJ, FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Justice have limited, not unfettered authority. That authority, the vast majority of their authority, is actually currently expired. It expired on September 30th. There was an extension that was included in the continuing resolution. As we all know, there's still ongoing debate about what happens to that continuing resolution. It is absolutely essential that authority get extended, because they are the ones, DHS and DOJ are the ones who come to sporting events proactively and set up the counter drone mitigation measures. Without that authority, they can't do it at the Super Bowl. They can't do it at the LA Olympics. They can't do it at any event, any of those events that we talked about. They can't do it at any of the FIFA games. We need that authority to give DHS and FBI the ability to proactively go out and do that kind of counter drone work. One of the things that there's also a couple of other things. There's things that events can do, that entities can do in advance. There are ways to work with the FAA to get no flight restrictions around a certain venue or a certain event. The FAA, the Department of Transportation, is about to issue another rule that's going to make it easier to do so, which is a good thing for event venues and owners and operators, and we can work with you to help get those in place. There's also legislation pending that would expand the authority of state and local authorities to be able to do more in the counter drone space as well.
Is there some reason why it isn't standard operating procedure to have counter drone measures at every large outdoor venue for every event?
There are, I can go on about this forever, so I'll try to be brief.
Restrain
There
yourself.
are authorities limitations. So there's only certain places where agencies, and again, it's just limited to federal agencies, can engage in counter drone mitigation measures. They have to be designated as a covered asset or facility. There are also resource and technological limitations. Even DHS and FBI, who have these authorities, don't have unlimited capacity to put their counter drone mitigation measures across every single event. And so one of the things that's kind of happening in Washington is an effort to expand authorities and to expand funding, which is critically important for all sporting events and entertainment venues and others. even though if that doesn't pass, there are things that can be done, like getting in place no flight zone restrictions, thinking about security. Counter drone measures are not that different from other security measures. Some of the same security measures apply, like, hardening the perimeter, thinking through issues about that, and engaging state and local law enforcement officials on some of these issues as well. They can, do things like, put up, again, put up a no-fly zone, make arrests for people who violate those no-fly zones, even if it's careless or inadvertent. It does send create some sort of chilling effect, and have a presence that specifically addresses drones as well as other issues.
Just so I'm clear on the landscape. So there's tech out there. There's anti-drone tech that exists in the world. If I'm a venue owner and DHS hasn't volunteered to help me put that up for my 85 games that I have for baseball, or my 15 games I have for football, or whatever, am I not allowed to go out and privately contract with that and use it? Do I have to go through a federal agency in order to use it?
You do, because there are use of those technologies, unless there's an exception, violates a range of different federal criminal rules. So depending on the technology, it can violate the Wiretap Act, it can violate the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and it can violate rules on sabotaging of an aircraft. So taking down a drone violates the sabotage of an aircraft rule, which is a felony with significant years in prison associated with it.
Okay. I mean, you're not in charge of it. I'm not in charge of it. But if an event like this happens and people find out there was tech and it wasn't everywhere where it could be, that's just going to be another loss of our confidence in the government moment nationally. I can pretty easily guarantee that.
And I think what we would see in that scenario as well is that there's a lack of understanding of why a private entity didn't do everything that they could to prevent something like that from happening. And it's very difficult to say, well, there's nuance and we can't do it. That's not a satisfactory response. And in fact, we see this in sport all the time on the safeguarding side, which is a little bit of a tangent, but I'll raise it because it's analogous, right? Where there are certain types of misconduct across national governing bodies that cannot be investigated by the organization. It has to be outsourced to the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. And when a crisis occurs, when misconduct occurs, and you're explaining to your stakeholders that, I'm sorry, our hands were tied, we couldn't investigate, or we couldn't look into this, it's not very satisfactory. And so that's something that I think it actually is ripe for preparing in advance, really thinking through how will we explain this in a way that people understand. If there is a major drone related attack, how do we describe that our hands were tied? There was nothing we could do.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough one. So do you want to go back into the scenario and think about after the first hour, maybe after the first day? What about the week after? What about 6 months after? What are your thoughts about how that plays into the future of the after the event?
Yeah, I think that's a helpful next step. And what I'll do, and then maybe ask Jen to build on it, is just kind of do a little bit of a run of show, a little bit of an outline, and then we can build on each of those things and tell me what I've missed. But so we've established that we're going to contain the incident largely through law enforcement. That's not something that the club could do themselves, but the incident is contained and some remedial measures are being implemented. What do we do at the outset? We tap insurance immediately. And this is sort of a critical aspect of how we're going to triage this in the very long term, right? There will be long-term engagement and discussions and arguments and potentially litigation with insurers around.
Is this a GL policy? Is this just covered by your baseline insurance?
Oh gosh, I think we should ask, we have our insurance expert at the back of the room, Ken Grunstein. We need to ask him what policies are impacted. But I think what you would—
Maybe that'll be our next seminar.
That's 102. I think what you do is you look at all of your policies. You're going to be tapping every one of your policies in some way or another, depending on the breadth of the impact. and the nature and scope of the incident. We're also looking very closely at our business partner contracts, our vendor contracts, our and there are so many different stakeholders here, right? The owner of the stadium is not necessarily the club, right? So who does the club need to liaise with in terms of their business partner contracts? Who is the stadium talking to understand what the liability might be, right? So that scrutiny over business partner contracts and understanding, again, where your liability lies and what the litigation landscape looks like is going to stem from that. We're also going to hear from DOJ, so prepping key people so that they understand that that's what's coming next, right? That there's going to be either a CID, a subpoena, something will come our way from DOJ as they're investigating as well. You're going to have litigation from individuals who are impacted, again, from business partners. So there's a lot of outlining of the risks that have stemmed from this incident.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And the two other things I would add to that is one, congressional oversight, both at the federal level, maybe at the state level as well. So particularly in an incident this big, you would certainly expect that there will be interest in various staff, certainly trying to understand what happens, potentially a hearing. And so again, really important to engage in a smart and proactive way with those staff. You want to be responsive. It helps. It makes the relationship a lot better going forward. And that's also an area where we can help. And then just the rebranding and rebuilding. I mean, obviously the entity is going to take a hit from being the subject of an attack. And so thinking smartly about, again, this goes back to the statements, but the statements expressing concern initially, eventually you want to move a little bit into statements talking about all the steps, the proactive steps that you're taking as well, without, again, getting into the facts of what happened, but showing how seriously the entity, the club, is taking this and what they're doing to support the team, to support the injured, to rebuild, to ensure safety and security for future events is going to be really important as well.
One thing that we didn't, just to build on that, we didn't emphasize the internal comms. And as a note, which I think many of us are accustomed to being attuned to, internal comms are external comms. So whatever you say internally, we should just assume it's also going to be disseminated externally. However, there is a different line of communication, of kind of the way that you communicate with your internal employees that I think will really matter in an incident like this or any level of crisis. You want to demonstrate to your employees that you are focused on them as much as you are on the external individuals who may have been impacted. And so thinking about your internal comms while you're triaging these legal issues is going to be very important as well.
I just want to give the MCLE code word since we're a little over, we're more than halfway through. So it's Sports 2025. Really innovative code word. Sports 2025 is what you'd want to report. I want to flip over, if we can, to talk about what folks should be doing now. Move away from the scenario a little bit. What does it make sense for them to be doing now in preparation of this, in this? But I want to ask you a question before we do that, and you can answer this or not. There's been plenty of events. My mind keeps going back to the Boston Marathon bombing because I'm a Bostonian and close to that situation. Do you think there are examples you can point to where organizations have dealt with these kinds of crises particularly well?
It's a really difficult question because
we've seen Atlanta, the Olympics in
Yes.
Atlanta,
Yes.
The Boston Marathon bombing. I mean, the scenario goes back pretty far. I remember a novel when I was a kid called Black Sunday, where somebody was flying a blimp into the Super Bowl. I'm probably the only one who remembers that novel. But we've had real life events. Are there any ones that you look at and go, yeah, they did it right?
Yeah, so I'm going to respond, but in a way that's not sort of directly on point, but I think it's instructive. The number one crisis that people will cite as being handled impeccably is the Tylenol crisis. So, and this is from the 80s, where Tylenol was, somebody was tampering with the Tylenol bottles and, put some sort of a poison in the Tylenol and children died, among others. And the reason that that is cited as being handled well is because the executives came out immediately. They didn't shy away from the crisis. They stepped into it. They acknowledged it. And because the remedy is very, very clear and stays with us, which is that was the advent of the Tylenol bottles and now all medication having kind of that seal on it that is difficult for children to open, right? Like there's a certain way that you open the bottle, there's the seal, there's the stuffing inside. And so I guess as I'm thinking out loud, what the takeaway I think is, if the remedy is clear, the way that you have fixed it is clear, and there's a legacy around that remedy, I think that's what stays with people. Otherwise, it's very difficult not to remember the incident itself, right? Atlanta and Boston, and right, like that stays with people because it's so impactful, and you sort of culturally lose a little bit of innocence. But if there is clarity around the way forward, I think that's the best way to counter the damage that a crisis like that can do.
I completely agree. Only thing I would add to that is the other piece of that is making sure it doesn't happen again. I mean, this is not like the huge crisis, but we think about like all the, kind of the piecemeal things that we keep on hearing about, like planes, with the door falling off or the screw falling off. Like the fact that those haven't been fixed is a problem, and that becomes a repeat problem for the company. So this gets back, I think this takes us back to the beginning, which is the proactive things that need to happen. This should happen before an incident, but certainly needs to happen after an incident, because you do not want to be a repeat player in crisis management situations.
I just want to make one observation as somebody who cares about sports and follows sports. Thought to myself, why do we follow professional sports? Like, why do we care? Or college sports? And what I've concluded is it's about civic pride. That's at base, it's about civic pride. I'm cheering for my city. I'm proud of my city. The players change, right? We keep cheering for the same organization in the same uniforms. Where I think I've seen it done well is especially where the community was brought together around the event, which there must be a role for the club and the organization in that, and helping people heal from that and helping people understand it, because at base, it's an attack on your city. If this happens, if this happened in Los Angeles, we'd feel like this was an attack on all of us.
Yeah, that's actually very well said. And it raises another point, which is that, and I don't say this callously, but it's true, because we're talking about, many of our clients and corporations that are in the business of being a business. It could be a brand opportunity. There is a brand opportunity embedded in being at the center of a crisis if you do things like come together with your community, come together with your business partners, and think of creative ways to ensure that those who are impacted, including the entire city, because a city and a country would feel impacted by something like this, that you are one of them, that you are there, you stand shoulder to shoulder with them instead of retracting, being defensive, not addressing the crisis. So there's some level of opportunity there if done correctly and managed correctly.
I would say if you understand your civic role, helping the healing process is a natural thing that you would do. And what comes of that will be good. So getting back to the question of preparing. So if I'm helping to run an organization, we're thinking about scenario planning, we're going through seminars like this. What are we doing before? What are we doing to be ready so that when it happens, we're not thinking about what should we be doing in the moment? We're focusing on the actual crisis itself. What are smart things that GCs and executives should be doing now before something happens?
So I'll also do a list, and then you can fill in what I miss and elaborate. But I think, number one is a security assessment, both physical security and also cybersecurity, looking through, making sure that, there's a gap assessment, there's clarity about who's doing what, there's a review of what vendors are doing what, there's a review of the security protocols of those vendors. Those kinds of gap assessments, those assessments are critical, and having outside experts come in and help kind of take a fresh look can be extraordinarily valuable. Two, insurance, we've already talked about that, making sure that there's good insurance. The other thing that Certainly, venues and stadiums should think about it as the Safety Act. For those of you who are not familiar with it, the Safety Act provides liability protections in the event of a declared act of terrorism. It's the Secretary of Homeland Security declared act of terrorism. There's a whole process for applying for those protections, but they're quite significant in obviously those relatively limited situations in which there's a declared act of terrorism, but they can be very valuable. The third is vendor contracts. I mean, oftentimes, like, the weakest link in security, like we're a chain, particularly when we're talking about cybersecurity, we're all interconnected. And so any weak link in that security can have a big effect on an entity, not necessarily in a mass casualty sort of way, but in other kinds of ways that are quite important. So really looking at vendor contracts, who your vendors are, making sure that there's appropriate security and cybersecurity requirements on those vendors as well is really important. Even like you think about in a stadium, when you have people bringing in food, like what kinds of checks are they doing on their employees? All of that's very important. And then liaising with state and local law enforcement and federal, the JTTFs, the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, establishing that line of communication so that if there's an event, you know who to call. You're not figuring it out for the first time. Putting that in place is important. And then like writing it all down, having an incident response plan, making clear what the roles and responsibilities are. And then finally, the last thing is exercising it. They don't have to be day-long exercises. You can do it in an hour. You can do it in chunks. But exercising it with the right people, with the C-suite,
You're talking about a war game.
Exactly. So that people know what the roles and responsibilities are, and you can identify the gaps before you get into a crisis situation.
I think that's exactly right. And maybe just to take a step back, because we are talking about an extreme crisis scenario, but our clients face all kinds of crises that are physical in nature, cyber in nature, or HR in nature, the separation of a key executive. One of the things that we often advise clients to do is just to sit down and think about your top 5 vulnerabilities. What are areas of vulnerability that could result in a crisis for your specific organization? Because of the kind of organization that you are, what type of crisis are you specifically planning for, mitigating against, anticipating, and then launching into an incident response plan where you are prepared for one of those inevitabilities, if they were to come to pass. So doing exactly what Jen said, but thinking a little bit more specifically about the type of organization that you are and, what might arise for you, and everything from, if you're a major corporation, some of what we've talked about today is absolutely, on the table, but also for smaller organizations or nonprofits, what kind of, incidents may arise that you need to be.
Des, have you led these kind of war game exercises, and what's the lift in readiness that you see in organizations who do them?
It is so much more helpful if you're coming into a crisis prepared. Everybody, you have a written plan, and your key executives can sort of step into their roles. They're empowered to step into their roles because they've practiced. And so if we have the benefit of working with clients proactively, it is so much easier when something arises. They are prepared to triage. Of course, we have to make tweaks to any holding statement we've prepared. Of course, we have to do some shifting to make sure that we're meeting the moment. But by and large, if you have an incident response plan, even just something sketched out that you've done kind of at a superficial level, you are miles ahead of hair on fire triaging in real time.
I have in my mind a book that literally sits on the shelf that you pull down and say, here are the people, here's their contact information, this is step 1. Is that overly prescriptive? Are people doing that? How does it work on the ground of preparedness?
That's exactly it. It's key stakeholders of the company who are designated to be part of this response. It is the name and number of our insurance carrier. It is the name and contact details of law enforcement. It's your outside counsel. Everything in as few pages as possible so that you can quickly triage. It's the spokesperson. It's what the spokesperson can say. Everything is articulated, and you're exactly right. Pull it off the shelf, break glass. You've got your plan.
And one thing that we haven't said yeah, but that in these kinds of crisis situations, sometimes comms go down. So as part of that crisis incident plan, you have to have, what are ways that you can connect with people if you can't do emails? It's hard because we none of us have landlines anymore. So it used to be that you put the landline number in. I'm dating myself, but what's the mechanism? Like, is there is there going to be a meeting? Like, what do you do if you can't reach people? And that needs to be part of the plan.
You're all going to want to use my carrier pigeons, and they're not going to be available. Sorry, they're taken. Anything else on preparedness? Any other key points? By the way, I think if you're in Los Angeles and your venue and you don't have an active earthquake preparedness plan, and that's going to happen, folks. We all should have an earthquake preparedness plan. Where's everybody going to meet? Where's your family going to meet? But what else on preparedness?
Jen touched on this, but I think it's critical to reemphasize. You have to actually take a look at it beforehand. It doesn't do any good, right? It's like any policy. It doesn't do any good if you haven't engaged with it. And so ensuring that at least the people who are designated as the core response team are aware of their roles, have agreed to take on the roles, right? You don't want to designate someone as the person triaging, for example, the hotline, if they don't want to, or if they don't feel prepared to, right? So ensuring that your team has laid eyes on the plan is as critical as
working those muscles.
Exactly.
Yeah, I hope we don't have to convince athletic organizations that they should practice.
Right, there we go. That's very on brand.
But on that exercising too, and exercise, I mean, there's turnover in companies. Like, not the person who exercised a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago might not be in that role. And so doing this once a year, even if you don't have turnover, it's the practice. It's making sure that there's muscle memory, that there's clarity, that people, there's turnover in the partners, there's turnover in the FBI and DHS and Joint Terrorism Task Forces. And so just an annual refresher and review is really important as well.
We're down to the last 3 minutes or so. So I want to leave it to you to talk about something else. If you wanted to talk about non-emergency scenarios, we've seen plenty of them, from sexual abuse scandals to owners that had to be exited because of things they said, or ask the audience in the room if they have questions and seek to answer those. You tell me.
I'm happy to take any questions, and maybe, I don't know if any questions came through remotely, but maybe we
don't
can
have it. But
Okay.
are there questions in the room? Somebody have a question? Somebody has a question and they don't want to be the first person. There's the brave one.
I'll be the first. Our event right now is on a school campus in Torrance. So it's not LA, but it's still its own city. And we've just grown to about 1,200. We're expecting 2,000 people this year. At what point of a size of an event do you get the government involved?
Let me repeat the question so people online hear it. The scenario is a school in Torrance, which is a city here in Los Angeles, growing up to a 2,000 person event. So we're talking about a school and a 2,000 person event. At what point do you interface with law enforcement? What size of event? What kind of event?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is obviously on everybody's mind, given incidents over the last month or so. So it's a very important question. I mean, I think step number one is to work with campus security. They are going to be the first line of defense on a school event. So talking to campus security should have that engagement with local law enforcement at a minimum, and they should have a plan. I don't, without knowing the school, and again, this is why specific gap assessments are so important, but what is campus security prepared to do? What kinds of checks are possible for people coming in that are consistent with the purpose and the mood and the effect of the event? And then what kinds of engagement can there be with local law enforcement in advance to let them know it's happening and see if potentially there's some space for them to engage as well.
Des?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a very good sense. And I think you can always be proactive. It's never too early to be proactive, and particularly where there's a school involved, because there's heightened sensitivity around that. So your proactivity, even if you meet some closed doors, right? Like, oh, we're not available to help you yet, but just getting that process started as early as possible, I think is prudent. Can I jump into your prior prompt just for a moment?
Sure.
Say that, as you asked us to reflect on something, I was thinking through, I've handled many sexual abuse and misconduct cases, many key people separations. And I'll say kind of two opposing things. One is the companies who have landed best always lead with their North Star, with their mission statement, with their ultimate, values. And so that should be at the forefront anytime a crisis hits. And then equally, and this will sound self-serving, but I promise it's also true, which is having trusted counsel on board so that you're not making missteps while you're leading with your North Star. That's the best way to navigate really any level of crisis.
I just want to end, I think we're right on time. If you'll give me 30 seconds just with a story that's related to this. I think people will, and this is kind of a bummer, this scenario that we just rolled out for you. So I'm going to try to leave you on a high note. People will surprise you in the best ways sometimes. And a lot of people probably know this story. When the marathon bombing happened in Boston, the Red Sox decided to play their game the next day. There was a decision to play their game the next day. I think it was Patriots Day. And if you know the Red Sox, you know that in the 8th inning, I think, they play the song Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond. The day of the game, Neil Diamond showed up at Fenway Park, flew up on his own dime from Florida, literally knocked on the door and said, "Can I play the song tonight?" And somebody was smart enough to say, "Yes, Mr. Diamond, here's your microphone." And he played the song. People will surprise you in the best ways. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention. I hope you got something out of it. If you have questions that you weren't courageous enough to ask or you're online, we'll try to answer them. You can contact these folks and they'd be happy to speak with you. And we're very grateful for you listening. Thanks.
Thank you all.